The reactor died with a sound like a heart giving up. For one full second, every light on the science vessel Velmara held still. Then they went red, all at once, washing the corridors in the color of bad news. A low alarm started somewhere deep in the ship, slow and tired, as if even the warning system knew it was too late. Sorrel felt the floor tilt under his soft, four-fingered feet. He was a small being, even for a Tyran, with pale skin and long fingers that were made for handling fragile things, not steering a dying ship through deep space. He had been a xenobiologist for 30 years. He had never been a soldier. He had never wanted to be. He grabbed the nearest wall and pulled himself toward the bridge. Inside, the air already tasted wrong, thinner, drier. The crew were at their stations, but their movements were small and afraid. Mela, his young navigation officer, sat hunched over her console with her shoulders shaking. 3 of his other crew were slumped in their seats, not moving. Their breathing was shallow. One of them was the ship's medic. The medic could not help anyone now. "Status," Sorrel said. His voice came out softer than he wanted. Mela looked up. Her large eyes were wet. "The reactor will not restart. Life support is on backup. We have maybe 4 hours of clean air, maybe less." Sorrel closed his eyes. 4 hours. 4 hours in a sector of space where no one traveled, on a ship no one expected to hear from for another 2 weeks. "Send a distress call," he said. "I did twice, on the standard band, nothing." "Send it again, on every band you have." Mela hesitated. "Every band, sir. Some of those are old, some are restricted." "Every band, Mela." She turned back to her console. Her fingers moved fast, almost angry, tapping signals out into the dark. Standard band, Concord band, trade band, old shipping bands no one used anymore. And then, near the bottom of her list, a frequency marked with a thin red line and the words "Do not contact." She paused for only half a breath, then she tapped it too. The signal went out. It traveled through empty space at a speed that even the Tyrans could not really feel in their hearts. It passed cold rocks and dead stars. It passed a conquered patrol that did not see it because they were not listening on that frequency anymore. No one was. The frequency had been left open only because nobody wanted to admit they were the one who closed it. Then the signal crossed a line. The line was not drawn on any map a Tyran would carry. It was a quiet, polite line in the Concord's records, a thin border around one small sector that the rest of the galaxy had agreed, very quietly, to leave alone. Behind that line lived a species that other species did not speak about at dinner. The signal slipped across the border and kept going. On a small rock far from anywhere important, a listening station sat half buried in red dust. It was an old station. Most of its consoles had been switched off years ago. The officer on duty was a woman named Renaa. She had short dark hair, tired eyes, and a cup of coffee that had been cold for an hour. She was reading a book on her tablet because nothing ever happened on this rotation. Nothing had happened on this rotation for 6 years. A light on a console she had almost forgotten about began to blink. Renaa looked up. She blinked too, slowly, as if she did not believe what she was seeing. Then she set her tablet down very carefully, as if any sudden movement might scare the light away. She walked over to the console. She pressed a button. A voice came through, thin and frightened, speaking a language her station translated without being asked. "This is the science vessel Velmara. Reactor failure, 18 crew, 3 unconscious. We have less than 4 hours of air. Please, anyone, please." Renaa stared at the console for 3 long seconds. Then she ran. She ran down the corridor, past empty rooms and old equipment, until she reached the small communications office where her commander was eating a sandwich at his desk. "Sir," she said, breathing hard, "we have a real one." He looked up. "A real what?" "A real distress call across the line. 18 souls, reactor dead, 4 hours." He set his sandwich down. He stood up. He did not waste time asking if she was sure. "Get me the still water," he said. Back on the Velmara, Sorrel sat in the captain's chair and listened to the silence. Mela was still typing, sending the call over and over, her voice now too tired to cry. Sorrel looked at his crew, at the three slumped figures, at the young engineer pressing her face against a cold wall to feel something solid, at Mela's small, shaking shoulders. He had spent his whole life studying gentle worlds. He had written papers about kindness in low-gravity species. He had taught classes on why peace was the natural state of intelligent life. Now he was going to die quietly in the dark, and the only thing he could hope for was that someone, somewhere, was listening on a frequency they were not supposed to be listening on anymore. A small chime sounded from Mela's console. She froze. Then she turned very slowly and looked at Sorrel with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not fear, not relief, something in between. "Sir," she whispered, "someone answered." The reply was only 7 words long. It came through the speaker in a calm, even voice that did not sound rushed or angry or proud. It just sounded like someone who had been waiting for the call. "We hear you, hold on, help is moving." Mela read the words 3 times before she could believe them. Then she made a small, broken sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob, and pressed both hands over her mouth. The young engineer at the back of the bridge slid down the wall and sat on the floor, shaking. One of the unconscious crew gave a tiny cough, and Mela almost ran to her, almost cried again, before she remembered that the medic could not help and that nothing had actually changed yet. Sorrel did not move. He sat in the captain's chair with his long fingers wrapped around the armrests. He was listening to the reply in his head, playing it again and again. The voice, the rhythm of the words, the small, almost invisible pause before the translator finished its work. He knew that pause. He had heard it once, years ago, in a recording his professor had played in a closed lecture hall. The professor had warned them never to repeat what they were about to hear. He had said only one species in the known galaxy produced a translation delay of that exact length, because only one species had a language so messy, so full of side meanings and jokes and old songs, that even the best translation matrix had to stop and think. Sorrel stood up slowly. "Mela," he said, "tune the reply through the analysis filter." Mela wiped her eyes and obeyed. The voice came back, slower this time, broken into small pieces of sound. Sorrel listened. The pause was there. So was the soft edge at the end of each word, the breath that the speaker did not even know they were giving. He closed his eyes. "Captain," Mela said. "What is wrong?" They answered. Someone answered. "Someone did," Sorrel said quietly. "Who?" He opened his eyes and looked at her. He thought about lying. He thought about saying it was a conquered cruiser, or a passing trader, or a friendly outpost. He thought about how easy it would be to let his crew believe a kind story for the next hour or two while the rescue came. But Mela was his navigator. She would see the ship on her screen before it docked. She would see the shape of it. She deserved the truth first, while there was still time to sit down for it. "Mela," he said, "the signal you sent, the last band, the one with the red line." "Yes." "Do you remember what sector is behind that line?" She thought for a moment. Then her face changed. The color drained out of her cheeks until she was almost gray. "No," she whispered. "No, that cannot be. That band is closed. It has been closed for 40 years. It was open enough." The other crew on the bridge were watching now. The young engineer on the floor had stopped shaking and was staring up at Sorrel with wide, slow eyes. Even the unconscious crew seemed quieter, as if the air itself was waiting. Sorrel took a breath. "Our help," he said, "is human." For a long second nobody spoke. Then Mela made a small sound like she had been punched. The young engineer hugged her knees to her chest. One of the older crew, a chemist named Veth, stood up so fast his chair fell over. "Captain," Veth said, his voice shaking, "we have to send another signal. We have to tell them to stay back. We have to." "And do what, Veth?" "Die politely." "They are monsters, sir. You know the records. They evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day. They kept it from killing them by killing it back. They wrestle their own predators for fun. They keep wolves as pets. They laugh during battle. Their children fall from trees and stand up and climb the tree again. I know the records." "Then send the signal back. Tell them no. Tell them we made a mistake." Sorrel looked at the unconscious medic in the corner. Her chest was moving very slowly now. Each breath looked harder than the last. "Veth," he said, "look at her." Veth looked. "She has maybe 2 hours, Sorrel said. "Maybe less. None of us have more than 4. The nearest conquered ship is 6 days away. The nearest trade route is 3. The only voice that answered our call came from across a line our own government drew because they were afraid. So tell me, Veth, tell me what you would like me to say back to them." Veth opened his mouth. Then he closed it. He sat down on his fallen chair as if his legs had stopped working. Mela's console chimed again. She jumped, everyone jumped. A second message was coming through. Sorrel nodded for her to read it out loud. Mela cleared her throat. Her voice was small. "They say," she read, "we are 40 minutes out. They say to seal off any rooms we are not using to save air. They say to put the unconscious crew in the warmest room. They say not to be afraid of the ship when it arrives. They say it looks worse than it is." She paused. "They say their captain's name is Idris. They say he wants us to know that." Sorrel sat back down in his chair. He thought about a name being offered like a small, open hand. 40 minutes, he said softly. "Seal the rooms, move the unconscious, and someone please make sure the lights on the docking side are on." Mela looked at him. "Why the lights, sir?" Sorrel almost smiled. "So they can see us," he said, "so they know we are still here. 40 minutes is a long time when the air is running out." The crew of the Velmara moved through their dying ship in small, careful groups. Veth and 2 others carried the unconscious medic into the warmest cabin, wrapping her in every blanket they could find. The young engineer, whose name was Lin, sealed the doors of 3 empty labs to save what air was left. Mela stayed at her console, watching the long-range scanner, waiting. Sorrel walked the corridors alone. He passed the lab where he had spent most of his career, a small room full of cold soil samples and dried plants from gentle planets. He passed the small dining room where his crew sometimes ate together and argued about books. He passed his own cabin, where a photo of his daughter sat on a shelf, smiling at a camera she had never grown old enough to see again. He touched the door of his cabin with 2 fingers and kept walking. When he reached the bridge, Mela was very still. "Sir," she said, "they are here." Sorrel looked at the main screen. At first he saw nothing. Then he saw a shape and his throat went dry. It was not a rescue tug. It was not a medical cruiser. It was not even a small patrol ship. It was a warship. Long, dark, and silent, it slid out of the black like a knife being drawn from a sheath. Its hull was scarred in long, ugly lines, marks left by weapons no Tyran instrument on the bridge could even name. 3 of its plates had been replaced with metal that did not match the rest. One of its forward sections was blackened, as if something terrible had once burned there and never quite been cleaned. The ship was a Tyran's nightmare made real. Veth, standing in the doorway, made a small choking sound. Mela's hands began to shake on her console. "Sir," she whispered, "it is a warship. They sent a warship. They sent a warship for us." "I see," Sorrel said. The Stillwater turned slowly until its broad side faced the Velmara. It did not aim its weapons. It did not power up any visible system. It just stopped, very close, like a large animal lying down beside a smaller one to keep it warm. The speaker on the bridge crackled. "Velmara, this is the Stillwater. My name is Idris Vale. I am the captain of this vessel. I can see your ship. I can see your lights. Thank you for leaving them on." The voice was calm. It was not deep or loud or proud. It was the voice of a man who had said these same words many times before to many frightened people. Sorrel pressed the button to reply. His hand was steady, which surprised him. "This is Sorrel, captain of the Velmara. We are 18 crew. 3 are unconscious. The reactor is dead. Our air is thin. We are afraid." There was a small pause. "That is honest, Captain," Idris said. "I respect that. Here is what is going to happen. I am sending 3 teams. 1 medical, 1 engineering, 1 with food. They are not armed. They will move slowly. They will ask permission before they touch anything. If at any point you want them to stop, you say the word and they will stop. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Good. Tell your crew not to be afraid of how my people look. We are bigger than you. We move differently. That is not a threat. That is just how we are built. Okay." Sorrel almost laughed. The sound caught in his throat. "Okay. One more thing, Captain." "Yes." "We came a long way to bring you home, so please try to let us." The line went quiet. On the screen, 3 small shapes detached from the side of the warship. They were not landing craft. They were not heavy boarding pods. They were soft, round shuttles painted white with a small symbol on each side, a symbol Sorrel did not recognize but somehow understood. A circle, a line through it, a second, smaller circle inside. It looked like a hand reaching across a border. The shuttles drifted toward the Velmara's docking port. "Mayla," Sorrel said, "open the door for them." Mayla hesitated only a heartbeat. Then she pressed the release. The first human stepped through. She was tall, much taller than Sorrel had expected, even after the warning. Her shoulders were broad under her medical jacket. Her hair was tied back in a tight knot. Her face was younger than her eyes. She moved into the corridor slowly, with her hands open at her sides, palms forward, the way one might approach a small animal that had every right to be scared. She looked at Sorrel. She gave a small, careful nod. "Captain," she said, her voice was warm. "My name is Hannah. I am one of the medics. May I see your unconscious crew?" Sorrel could not speak for a moment. He had spent his whole life studying gentle creatures. He had written a paper once about how the kindest beings in the galaxy were always the smallest, the softest, the ones who could not hurt anyone even if they wanted to. He looked up at this tall, scarred woman from a world that had tried to kill its own children for 1,000,000 years, and he saw the same kind of careful, open hand in her eyes. He found his voice. "This way," he said. "Please, this way." Behind Hannah, more humans were stepping through the door. None of them carried weapons. One of them was holding a tray of warm bread, the steam still rising from it, the smell so strong and so unfamiliar that Lynn, the young engineer, began to cry quietly in the corner. The Stillwater hung in the dark outside, scarred and silent, watching over the Velmara like a guard dog. And the Velmara, for the first time in many hours, was no longer dying alone. Bread. That was the first thing the Tyrans noticed. Not the size of the humans, not the scars on their ship, not even the strange, smooth movements of their boots on the floor. It was the bread. It smelled like nothing in the Tyran galaxy. It smelled warm. It smelled like a memory none of them had, of a kitchen none of them had ever stood in. Lynn, the young engineer, kept rubbing her eyes as if the smell itself was making her tears come back. A human in a green jacket set the tray down on the small table in the dining room. He was the cook. His name was Bao. He had soft hands for a human, and a round face that smiled easily, and he kept apologizing for the bread. "I am sorry it is so plain," he said in slow, careful Tyran. "We did not know what your stomachs could take, so we made the simplest thing we know, just flour, just water, just a little salt. If anyone is sick, please tell me. I will make something else." Mayla picked up a small piece. She held it in her forefingers and stared at it as if it was a piece of a star. "You made this," she said softly, "in 40 minutes. Bao shrugged. "We had the oven ready before we left." "You had the oven ready," Mela repeated. "We always do," Bao said, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "Cold people get scared faster. Warm people can think. A warm stomach helps a cold mind, so we keep the oven ready, every shift, always." Mela began to cry again. She could not help it. She bit into the bread, and the warmth of it ran down her throat like a hand on her back, and she sat on the floor and cried into her food, while a human cook stood quietly nearby and did not say anything because he understood that some moments did not need words. In the corridor outside, the engineering team was already at work. The Velmara's reactor room was a small, dark space full of broken light. 2 human engineers, a woman named Priya and a man named Otto, were lying on their backs inside the access tunnel. Veth, the chemist, stood watching them with his arms crossed tight over his chest. He was still afraid. He had agreed to watch because he did not trust them alone with the ship's heart. Otto's voice came from inside the tunnel. "Veth, my friend, can I ask you something?" "What?" "This coupling here, the blue one, was this always cracked or did it crack when the reactor went down?" Veth blinked. He came closer, he looked. He had not even seen the crack, none of them had. "It was always like that," he said quietly. "We were told it was within safe limits." Otto laughed. It was a soft, tired laugh, not a cruel one. "Whoever told you that was wrong, my friend? This was your reactor's whole problem, this little crack. It bled pressure for years, slowly, until one day there was no pressure left to bleed." Priya pulled herself out of the tunnel. She had grease on her cheek. She was smiling. "We can fix this," she said. "We will need to print a new coupling, maybe 40 minutes. After that, your ship will hum like a young thing again." Veth stared at her. "You can print a new part for our ship, a Tyran ship. We have your blueprints in the Concord Public Archive. We pulled them on the way here. Your ship is older than I am, you know. Beautiful design, though. Whoever built her knew what they were doing." Veth did not know what to say. He had spent the whole trip to the reactor room rehearsing a speech in his head. A speech about how he would not let them break anything. A speech about Tyran pride and Tyran engineering, and how the humans should keep their hands to themselves. He had not been ready for compliments. Down the corridor in the warm cabin, Hannah was kneeling beside the unconscious medic. She had laid out a small mat of soft tools on the floor. She was humming, very quietly, an old song with no words. Her hands moved with a slow patience that did not match the urgency in the room. Sorrel watched her from the doorway. "She is breathing better," Hannah said without looking up. "Her lungs are small, smaller than I expected. I am giving her a low dose, very slow. I do not want to flood a system I do not understand." "Will she wake up?" "Yes." The word was simple. There was no doubt in it. Sorrel leaned against the doorframe. His legs were tired. His chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with thin air. "May I ask you a question?" he said. "Of course." "Why did you come?" Hannah paused. She tucked the blanket more carefully around the medic. Then she sat back on her heels and looked up at him. Her eyes were the color of wet stone. "Captain," she said, "somebody called for help. We were close. That is all the reason we needed." "But our sector, your sector, the line." "The line is a thing on paper. The voice on the radio was a real voice." She smiled a small, tired smile. "I have a sister who is a navigator. She is younger than your Mela. If her ship ever called out into the dark, I would want somebody to answer, even somebody she had been told to be afraid of." Sorrel could not speak. Hannah turned back to her patient. She began humming again. The song had a slow, simple shape. Sorrel did not know it. He thought maybe no Tyran had ever heard it before. He stood in the doorway and listened, and for the first time in many hours, he was not afraid. He was something else. He was ashamed, a little, of every story he had ever believed. News travels faster than warships. By the time the Velmara's reactor was humming again, by the time the unconscious medic had opened her eyes and asked for water in a small, surprised voice, by the time Bao the cook had taught Lin how to dip warm bread in a thin, sweet sauce, the Galactic Concord already knew. An emergency session was called on Halek Station, 3 sectors away. A round, white chamber with 100 seats filled in less than an hour. Representatives from every member species gathered with their robes still half-tied and their tea still half-poured. The shouting began before the doors finished closing. The Velen delegate stood up first. He was tall and thin, with skin like cracked paper, and he was very angry. "A human warship," he said, his voice climbing, "has crossed a quarantine line that was drawn by this body, with our seal, with our signatures. They did not ask. They did not warn us. They simply went. This is a violation. This is an act of contempt." The Borelian delegate, round and slow-moving, stood up next. "They did not just cross. They have boarded a Concord-flagged vessel. They are touching its systems. They are feeding its crew. Who knows what they are doing to those tyrants right now?" "Saving them," someone muttered from the back. The Velen turned sharply. "Who said that?" No one answered. A door at the side of the chamber opened. A human walked in. She was small for a human, only a little taller than a tall tyrant, with gray at her temples and a calm face. She wore no armor. She wore no medals. She wore a simple dark coat with one small symbol on the chest, the same symbol that had been painted on the side of the Stillwater's shuttles. A circle, a line, a second smaller circle, a hand reaching across. "My name is Inez Roa," she said. "I am the human envoy to the Concord. I came as soon as I heard. May I speak?" The chamber was silent. The Velen sat down slowly. "Speak." Inez walked to the center of the floor. She did not stand on the speaker's platform. She stood on the plain stone, with her hands clasped in front of her, the way one stands at a funeral. 53 hours ago," she said, "a tyrant science vessel sent out a distress signal on every band it could reach. One of those bands was an old emergency frequency that, by your own records, was supposed to be closed. It was not closed. The signal came through to a human listening station. The officer on duty was named Renaa. She was reading a book." A few delegates almost smiled. They tried to hide it. "Renaa heard the call," Inez went on. "She passed it up the chain. The chain made a choice. The closest ship that could reach the Velmara in time was a frontier response vessel called the Stillwater. So the Stillwater went. They went because a voice on the radio was a real voice. They went because we were close enough to help. They went because that is what we do when we hear someone calling out into the dark." She paused. "I am told that some of you are angry. I am told that some of you would like my people punished. I would like to ask you in this chamber in front of all of your colleagues what exactly you would have liked us to do instead. Pretend we did not hear. Wait for someone closer when no one closer existed. Send a polite message back saying we were sorry, but the paperwork was not in order." The chamber was very quiet. "I will wait," Inez said. "If anyone has an answer, I will listen." No one stood up. The door at the back of the chamber opened again. A tyrant walked in. It was Sorrel. He was small even by tyrant standards, and his crew uniform was wrinkled and his eyes were tired. He had come straight from the Stillwater. Hannah had wanted him to rest. He had refused. He walked to the center of the floor and stood beside Inez. He did not look at her. He looked at the rows of delegates. "My name is Sorrel," he said. "I am the captain of the Velmara. I am here because no one else from my ship is well enough yet. I am here because I asked Captain Vale to bring me, and he did, without asking why." He took a breath. 40 hours ago, I was dying. My crew was dying. We had 4 hours of air. I did not know if my daughter's photograph would ever be looked at by anyone again. I sat in my chair and waited for the lights to go out. The Velen opened his mouth. Sorrel did not let him speak. Then a human voice came through my speaker. It said 7 words, "We hear you. Hold on, help is moving." A warship came. It was scarred and dark, and it looked like every story I was ever told about the worst things in the galaxy. And out of that warship came a cook with bread, a doctor who hummed while she worked, an engineer who told me my ship was beautifully built. They did not raise their voices. They did not touch a weapon. They asked permission before they touched anything. He looked at the Velen directly. They asked permission, delegate, to touch a ship of a species they had been told to stay away from for 40 years. The chamber did not move. Sorrel's voice softened. I have read the same files you have. I have heard the same stories. I was taught, like all of you, that humans are what we should be afraid of. I am here to tell you that we were wrong. Not a little wrong. All the way wrong, from the first page to the last. He looked around the chamber slowly. Whatever you decide today, he said, decide it knowing that I am alive because of them. My crew is alive because of them. And the only reason any of you have me standing here in front of you, telling you this, is because somewhere far away, a tired officer was reading a book on a frequency you forgot to close. He stepped back. Anise did not speak. She did not need to. Goodbyes are strange on a warship. The Stillwater had docked at a quiet Concord station 3 days after the chamber session. The handover was meant to be small and formal. The Tyrans would walk off. The humans would stay aboard. The 2 crews would nod politely and go their separate ways, as quarantine protocol required. That was the plan. It did not survive contact with the Velmara crew. Lynn was the first to break it. The young engineer hugged Otto so suddenly that the big man almost dropped his coffee. She came up to his chest and pressed her face against his jacket and cried into him without saying a word. Otto stood very still for a moment, then patted her back with one large hand, very gently, the way one might pat a tired child. "You take care of yourself, little engineer," he said. Lynn nodded against his jacket. Veth and Priya argued for 10 minutes about a small piece of code Priya had left in the Velmara's new reactor program. Veth said it was unnecessary. Priya said it was a safety net. They argued the way old friends argue, with their hands moving and their shoulders close, until Veth finally laughed, which was a sound none of his crew had heard him make in years. Mela found Bao in the small kitchen. He gave her a paper bag with 3 loaves of bread inside. "For your family," he said, "when you get home." Mela took the bag in both hands. She looked up at him. "How did you know I have a family?" Bao smiled. "You talked about your mother twice during dinner last night." She had not even noticed. Hannah was the last one Sorrel saw. She was standing by the airlock, her medical bag over her shoulder, her hair tied back again the way it had been when she first stepped onto his ship. The unconscious medic, Tora, who was no longer unconscious, stood beside her. The 2 women were holding each other's hands, the way 2 people hold hands when they have shared something neither of them will fully understand for a long time. Tora let go and walked slowly towards Sorrel. She still moved carefully. Her lungs were still healing. "Captain," she said, "I am ready to go home." "I am glad to hear that, Doctor." Hannah pulled a small folded piece of paper out of her pocket. She gave it to Tora. Tora unfolded it. There was a single line written on it in careful Tyran script, slow and not quite right, the work of a human who had practiced the letters for hours. "You are not alone. You never were." Tora read it twice. Then she folded it again and held it against her chest. Sorrel stepped forward. He looked up at Hannah. He was used to looking up at humans now. It no longer felt strange. "May I ask you one more question?" he said, "before I go?" "Of course." "Why do you do this? Not you, Hannah, your people. Why did you cross a line that was drawn against you? Why did you spend fuel and time and crew and risk on strangers who, for 40 years, have been afraid of you? Why did you not, even once, ask for anything in return?" Hannah thought for a long moment. Her eyes went somewhere far away, past the airlock, past the station, past even the still water. She did not give the answer. Captain Idris Vale gave it. He had walked up quietly behind Sorrel, in the soft way he always walked, and Sorrel had not noticed him until he was already there. He had a small cup of tea in one hand. His gray hair was a little messy. He looked like a tired schoolteacher at the end of a long day. "Captain Sorrel," he said, "may I?" "Please." Idris took a slow sip of his tea. "Our world tried to kill us for a long time," he said. "Longer than I think any of you really know. The cold tried, the heat tried, the animals tried, the plants tried. The other humans tried, sometimes the hardest of all. For most of our history, every morning was a question of whether the day would let us live to see the night." He looked down into his cup. "The only reason we made it out, Sorrel, was because somewhere along the way we started reaching for each other. A hand pulled out of a river, a blanket thrown over a stranger, a piece of bread shared with someone who had nothing. That is the only reason we are here. That is the only reason there is a we at all." He looked back up. "So when a voice calls out into the dark, Captain, we answer. Not because we are noble, not because we are good, because we remember. We remember what it was like when no one came. And we promised ourselves a long time ago that, if we ever got the chance, we would be the kind of people who came." Sorrel could not speak. Idris smiled, very small. "Go home, Captain. Hug your daughter if you have one. Eat your bread. Tell your people what you saw. That is all we ask, not even that. We do not ask anything, just go home." Sorrel did not have words. He reached out slowly with his small four-fingered hand. Idris looked at it for a moment. Then he set his tea down on a nearby crate very carefully and took Sorrel's hand in his own large one. 2 species, 2 histories, 2 sets of stories, 1 small handshake in a quiet airlock. The Velmara crew walked off the warship one by one. The Stillwater pulled away into the dark. Far away, on a small rock half buried in red dust, Renat turned the old emergency console back on. She set a fresh cup of coffee beside it. She did not pick up her book again. She listened, just in case.